Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. For the Constitutions and Charge Group meeting today, we split up into two parts. Or at least this month will be split up into two parts. Both of them will be looking at Professor Ron Levy from the Australian National University's chapter in the forthcoming book, Deliberative Peacemaking, on the duty to deliberate before armed conflicts. So we're going to be spending the bulk of our time today with Professor Ron discussing the topic, and then afterwards we'll go into a bit of question and answers. And then following that discussion, we'll have a little bit of time for updates for anyone who might wish to share. But now, in the meantime, let me pass the mic to Professor Ron Levy.
Okay, thanks, Jim and David, and great to see everyone. Now, this is a work in which we propose this duty to deliberate before armed conflict. It's a duty that is normative and we hope in time a duty of international law. And the duty is specifically a duty to deliberate inclusively with one's opponents before resorting to acts of armed conflict. So to get there, we start with a bit of a provocative, but we think accurate claim about the role of constitutional value reasoning in armed conflict. So the claim is that underneath nearly every armed conflict, there lies an unresolved constitutional value conflict. So the argument that I'm going to lay out today is that such constitutional disputes are often foundational, meaning that they turn on choices among alternative values claimed to be at the base of a hierarchy of norms. So the only conceptually and practically feasible way to resolve these foundational constitutional conflicts is via, we'll argue, or I will argue today, deliberative democracy. So a duty to deliberate arises, and that duty again has to be inclusive of your enemies, which is the provocative bit, perhaps. Now, the objective of this work is to lessen, at least by degrees, some of the horrific rising tide of armed conflicts around the world, and to do that by addressing the normative disputes that underlie them, the normative constitutional disputes. Last year, for instance, was the fourth most violent, actually before genocide. So our claim about the nature of many conflicts having fundamental constitutional value foundations or conflicts beneath them is that a convincing claim? So in 2025, we have a number of examples we could look at, unfortunately, but the Thai-Cambodian border conflict is simply one of many. So that conflict this year is actually a long-standing conflict. There was a resurgence this year, but this actually goes back some time. The borders between the two countries are based in part on acts of the former French colonists in Cambodia. The disputed area is a Buddhist site and also a whole province that's claimed by both sides. The International Court of Justice ruled on this in 1962, and UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site in 2008. Neither of these interventions were particularly helpful. The UNESCO declaration actually probably aggravated the conflict. So international law has been rather ineffectual here at best. So in debates between the belligerent groups, the claims for territory turn on a range of value-based, effectively constitutional claims. So claims for a particular normative foundation, which then notionally resolves the sovereignty question. So these claims were based in history or topology, the location of cliffs and how it's actually easier to get to the Buddhist site from one side of the border than versus another. And also cultural affinity was a value that was asserted here. Each of these values or each of these perspectives was said to be the one that resolved the debate. Um, but ultimately, in substance, these kinds of debates are insoluble in the sense that, well, there is no single solution to them. The parties put forward claims that a given value or set of values should solve the matter, but these value claims are selective and they tend to support one's own side, of course. And they're what I've called bootstrapping in a recent article. So, bootstrapping means that a party asserts particular foundational values, and then having asserted these foundations, relies on those values and only those values, to purport to resolve a value contest underlying the conflict. So, very often, more than one of the parties will each confidently put forward as being determinative only certain values, values that, of course, support their own sovereignty claims. But these values, over foundational and conceptually constitutional values, really can't be resolved so neatly, and certainly not from the perspective of broadening out from the Cambodia-Thailand case. We can look at other disputes. In disputes over sovereignty more generally, we tend to see a similar pattern where value foundations are debated with a constitutional flavor. And this is a partial list that you see here of the foundations that tend to be asserted in various cases. So I'm calling these foundational constitutional values. These are values that are debated across, however, international law and constitutional law and non-legal normative reasoning. So it's really a mixture of these venues. So whichever venue or register these debates arise, the question is still conceptually constitutional, though, because it determines which values will constitute the sovereign group in a territory. So how these foundational value questions should be resolved, again, is uncertain. Why choose one of these over the others? In the normative literature and the international law of secession, for example, we might see a focus by a given author or a given court on one of these, or two of these, three of these. Stability, perhaps, human rights, formal enactment. Other people will promote other values, and which values should prevail is fundamentally uncertain from case to case. But the rhetoric of the parties at war will see very much the same problem that I mentioned, selective bootstrapping choices of values that, of course, promote one's parties. So a normative quagmire results, which makes resolving armed conflicts difficult, to say the least. So this normative and constitutional ambiguity can give cover to parties planning an armed offensive. They can justify it. And they can always find a justification through one of these listed values, or it may actually misguide some parties to see a kind of false sense of certainty that their claims and only their claims are the law comes to rescue here. Well, I'm not an international lawyer, but we had a number of international lawyers either write with us or advise us. And it seems that ultimately international law purports to contain armed conflict through the limitation of conflict to self-defense, but this doesn't necessarily work. So Oscar Schachter, one of the leading international lawyers in the past couple of generations, wrote that every time a government uses force or responds to such use by others, it invokes the law along with considerations of morality and humanity. It seems possible for every action to find support in law, and there appears to be no effective higher authority to settle the matter. So there are a number of problems here. First of all, the issue is constitutional, normative, and international law. It's not limited to international law. So in international law itself can't necessarily step in effectively. But in addition, international law is often itself ambiguous. So the international law of war specialist, Yoram Dinstein, wrote that more often than not, self-defense is invoked by both parties simultaneously. So both antagonists simultaneously. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. I won't say much more about the substantive international law, though. The paper that I'm presenting at the moment is actually a collaboration among 9 authors, 3 of whom are international lawyers, as you can see here, to consider what can be done to address what I'm calling this constitutional and normative quagmire at the base of many armed conflicts. We thought that we needed interdisciplinarity, so we have peace conflict scholars, we have deliberative democracy and constitutionalism scholars such as myself and Ian O'Flynn and so on. And this group essentially is one that, as I said, contends that deliberative democracy essentially has to be the solution when you have these foundational normative quagmires. Now, how do you resolve it? Well, we contend that the most conceptually rigorous and also the most pragmatically effective way of resolving these disputes underlying armed conflicts is through deliberative democracy, which is democracy plus. It's informed, uncoerced, mutually reasoned collective decision making. So this chapter is the last one in a book, as mentioned, on deliberative peacemaking, which every chapter explores deliberative democracy and peacemaking. And after 4+ decades of deliberative democracy research, one of its key lessons is that we need procedures to uh, add greater deliberation to democratic involvement, and that will lead to more widely and deeply trusted approaches to dispute resolution. And the reason for that is that deliberative democracy relies on democratic input, which can be highly legitimating. But to that, it joins into institutionally supported deliberation, which can curb democracy's very familiar pathologies. So it's neither too elite then and out of touch, nor too bluntly democratic. Deliberative democracy has democratic representation and rigorous deliberation that can be well trusted. And examples include the ubiquitous mini public, which is, as you may know, a randomly selected group of ordinary citizens charged with learning in depth about a policy issue, deliberating about it, carefully facilitating discussions and making recommendations. So these, of course, run in the thousands around the world. They're often highly effective, deliberating even in conflict areas like Colombia, Israel, Palestine. We identify in this chapter a less well-known alternative, the Mixed Armistice Commission, which in some conflict societies has also been very successful, actually, and arguably more practical than a mini public. So this commission is made up of a mixture of representatives from the belligerent groups, equal numbers from each, but then with a tiebreaker and deliberative facilitator from a third party country. So a single set of these commissions has curbed escalations of violence hundreds of times or more. Between 1949 and 1967, for example, they successfully kept the peace between Israel and its neighbors on countless occasions. The photo here shows some members of these early commissions. Many years later, similar bodies are actually at work at the moment on the Israeli-Lebanese border. And there have been many, many other examples going back over 100 years. So we argue again that often the only suitable way to resolve underlying constitutional value questions and quagmires, where the right answer is elusive, is via inclusive deliberative processes such as these. So these procedures take the element of value reasoning and they embrace it. So that's their democratic aspect. But these values and their interpretations in a given context are subject to deliberative procedures, which test claims and weigh them. So we test the legitimacy of values, non-public values, such as assumptions of superiority, racist assumptions, for example, these are excluded. Also, factual assumptions are tested. Deliberation also weighs values against each other in search of balance or win-win accommodations. So again, only a democratic and deliberative process, we say, can address value questions at the root of armed conflicts. And as importantly, only such a process is really broadly trusted enough to be authoritative among the competing groups. Now, given this, we make a key normative move, which is that inclusive deliberative procedures should be viewed not merely as useful options that belligerent groups can choose to employ, but as obligatory ways of scrutinizing the profound decision to start a campaign of deadly violence. And so this is a normative duty and an international legal duty that should find it's a procedural duty in international law, which doesn't yet fully exist and certainly not adequately at the moment. So the procedural duty includes what you see here. Uh, so let me give you a bit of an overview of what we have in mind. And as I said, we were fortunate to have top international lawyers as co-authors or advisors. I mentioned these existing duties. The existing duties mostly are in the UN Charter. So Article 33, for example, loosely obligates parties to use any of an open-ended set of procedures to talk things over before they resort to violence. But the focus on talk is potentially problematic, or discussion, even dialogue, is not sufficient. Deliberation and talk, sorry, deliberation is better than talk. Talk alone can be toxic. Deliberation is more than discussion, it's more than talk, it's more than dialogue. It means interactions that are inclusive, but also based on exchanges of broadly acceptable reasons, common assumed facts, civil discussion, and so on. So bodies like the Security Council were meant to replace war with talk, but their design never really focused on the quality of discussion. Only discussion of a deliberative kind, we argue, is conducive to peacemaking. At the same time, international courts are rather narrowly focused on international law rather than the broader ranging reasoning about value foundations that I mentioned. International courts are also not highly trusted. They're seen by the parties as biased, technocratic rather than value-based. Or the elements of this new duty to deliberate that we are promoting include ex ante. So it must be before a conflict. There's got to be an international monitoring body which watches for escalations and triggers deliberations. And that again has to be before the conflict begins. A standing commission, either a mini public or a mixed armistice commission, should then run the main deliberations that I've talked about. There should be equal representation and binary deliberative procedures. So this means that if you have three or more belligerent groups, you can only have two in a particular commission represented. You'd have to have multiple commissions for the different groups. And that's to keep any two of them from ganging up on one. And this is based on a past experience. Now, third party umpiring for deliberative facilitation and tie breaking is important to keep things from deadlocking. Substantive deliberative tests, which I mentioned, testing for the legitimacy of values, factual bases, weighing values up. And finally, uniform outcomes is important. You can't avoid this duty simply by saying that you're convinced the conflict is all the fault of the other side. You may be right about that, but if you were permitted to make that unilateral declaration and withdraw from the duty, then everyone would do so as well. So it's important to ask, will any of this work? Will it be successful? Will it help? It depends. It depends on what we mean by success, I suppose. Deliberative democracy is not a field that aims to perfect the world. It's mostly there to nudge the world towards incrementally more deliberative and inclusive practices. So that in turn can incrementally, perhaps more often, resolve underlying normative conflicts and again be incrementally more trusted and influential. So we're seeking here to lessen conflict stemming from selective bootstrapping value claims and to lessen or constrain the rush to conflict in turn. Not all armed conflicts will be solved. So here is that will be out next year that explores multiple approaches to deliberative peacemaking in detail. So I thank you all and welcome your questions.
Ron, before we do that, could you please repeat for people who haven't seen it before your biggest questions that you're struggling with that you want people to say something about?
Um, I can't remember what what I wrote you, to be honest. But I
I'll
suppose
go look for it if you want.
no, it's okay. It's
No worries. I'm pasting them in the chat now.
okay.
So
Thank you, Tim.
no
Shall
worries.
I? Okay, I'll go. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna, unless Ron, I can read them out just for people to
Yes,
later. So
please.
first, what are the strengths? What are the challenges beyond those mentioned in the paper of the duty presented as its methods? And then the second question is, are readers aware of national or international offices such as the UN or EU, etc., projects, funding organizations, etc., potentially interested in collaborating on efforts to establish slash institutionalize the duty? Perfect.
Right.
So I mean, in the meantime, I'm seeing we have some questions that are coming up in the chat already. So, King, would you like to come off mute and speak to your questions?
Hi, hello. Uh, thanks, Professor Ram, for the wonderful presentation. I'm from Myanmar, so I'm just reflecting the presentation, looking at the situation in Myanmar. So I posed a full question there. One
Mm,
is deliberative democracy uh, basically assume legitimate state institution capable or inclusive public reasoning. So like in a context like Myanmar, where the military junta is the main perpetrator and has international legitimacy, at least under the disguise of state sovereignty. Um, basically, how do we conceptualize deliberation when the state is said is the perpetrator? So that's my number one question.
mm.
Number two is, can deliberation exist under extreme repression, such as Myanmar, where the state, the junta, systematically reject dialogue and use violence to shut down such kind of deliberative channel? And my third and fourth is basically with this situation in Myanmar where the resistance forces such as People Defense Forces and long legacy organization like Anthony Resistance Group have gained significant territory in Myanmar. And this group has develop local governance system in their control area. So how can deliberation occur? Should these sort of spaces, like governance spaces, be recognized as a legitimate site of pre-conflict deliberation, even they are outside the formal state structure? And then basically, in a highly fragmented political landscape, how can deliberation occur across multiple armed actors, such a resistant group and community competing different vision of federal democracy? Over.
Okay, these are fantastic questions, and it's such a heartbreaking situation. We have one author, Cecilia Jacob, who's written all about Myanmar for the book, and she looks very much at the resistance groups and how they are actually managing to carry deliberation on locally. Um, and I can share that with you if you like. The book is all about these very almost inspiring, very idealistic levels of deliberation that, according to Cecilia, are helping to sustain the legitimacy of the sort of government in waiting, the sort of alternative government and the resistance groups. Um, now, that's very tricky, of course, under circumstances of violence, but that's the challenge of deliberative peacemaking, that sometimes the peace doesn't exist yet when you're trying to deliberate. And so, practically speaking, there are a number of things that need to happen. One of our more interesting chapters, I think, or they're all interesting, but one that I just read the other day and was particularly inspired by was by Alice Sue, who's at Stanford, and she's been involved in peacemaking in active conflict areas like Libya, Iraq, Yemen. And by doing it online, that's actually an important way of maintaining deliberative dialogues under conditions that are very dangerous, right? So the mini public that maybe many of us are aware of, for example, can actually be transferred online. And Alice's work shows that that's possible and that it's actually in some ways a positive. There are pros and cons of doing things online, less maybe emotional connection and sympathy between people who meet online. But on the other hand, there are some positives in terms of deliberation actually taking place. And so this book is very much about practical methods. Some of the entries are really about the worst, the most dangerous and difficult situations. Now, you mentioned at the end fragmentation. That's the whole point here. What we're doing is we're looking at a fragmented society and we're saying, why are they fragmented? And one of the reasons we argue is the absence of deliberation in the first place. So that's the problem. We will often hear people say you can't deliberate when people are fragmented or deeply divided or shooting at each other. And that's obviously the case in the sense that when they're doing that, they're not deliberating. But what's needed as an alternative is deliberative democracy. And so often what we are looking at is how can you use institutions to kind of force deliberation into a situation where it's not actually taking place yet. So we call this sort of institutional priming, or and the idea is that it can give people a trusted kind of reset, like a circuit breaker, where while the groups might not actually trust each other normally, they might be deeply divided. They might actually trust the design of a particular institution, and so if they can do that, they can be brought into these institutions, and there they can actually meet with each other and deliberate. And this has actually been shown a number of times. So empirically, when we look at places like Colombia, Yemen, the ones I've mentioned already, um, it's actually not particularly difficult to find cases of people deliberating under conditions of armed conflict. People want to deliberate, mostly, generally speaking, this is just a generalization, but it's the ordinary people who want to deliberate and leaders who are elites who are invested in the conflict who don't want to deliberate. And so deliberative democracy actually tends to channel into the ordinary, less elite people and to try to draw on that. So there are many answers to your questions. I hope that some of these will actually be useful. If you'd like, I can try to send you Cecilia Jacobs' chapter and Alice Sue's chapter just for a little bit more detail. But these are excellent and important questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, King. Next up, we have Felipe.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thank you, Ron. This is really interesting, and you just mentioned Colombia. I live in Colombia, in Bogota, but I have some questions regarding the design of mini publics, and I guess that the first one you already answered that one, because I was thinking in the possibility of convening mini publics. Then I would have a question regarding mini publics exactly with whom. That's mini publics representative of the people in general, of the citizens in general. And you just answered that yes, that's your idea. And I think that that's important. I think that that's an important use for mini publics in conflict contexts, to demonstrate that at least some people can dialogue. Maybe some segments of the population are just wanted to have conflict or to get the conflict worse, but some people want to dialogue, and to give a space for those people is worthy, and it's important, and it can change minds, and even of the people who are for the conflict. So I think that's a good point. I have a question on Ron, on the topics that you are imagining for deliberation, for example, in many publics. So, what kind of topics do you think that would be more suitable for a deliberation in a mini public? Because maybe some things are not the best options, but maybe others are. I don't know if you have thought about this topic, difference or differentiation. And the other question, and the final question, is about the governance system of the mini public. So who convenes the mini public? Because the thing with mini publics or with citizens assemblies is that in their current design, they need a lot of third party, because we don't count with a permanent structure for organizing mini publics, as for example, legislatures. Legislatures are completely embedded into our constitutional systems, but for many publics, we need conveners, we need facilitators, we need funders, we need a lot of people working in the organization. And we need a lot
Yeah.
of people thinking in the design of the mini public. So you talk about third-party conveners. I was wondering what exactly do you have in mind, if you could give us some examples. And thank
Yeah.
you. This is really, really interesting and a very important project. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a great question. So, in a way, my answers are going to range across the entire book and not just from this one chapter. So you said well, you started with comments about mini publics representing people, and some people want to dialogue. I think that's very clear. That's very we have a lot of evidence of this. And Juan Ugariza from Colombia has, I think one of the very best chapters that have ever been written on mini publics in conflict areas. It's incredibly detailed. He shows that what kinds of deliberation need to happen. What are the topics? How should it be organized? It's just an amazing chapter. Do you know Juan? I mean, obviously Colombia is a big place, but I think you
No,
should.
I don't know him.
Yeah, you should.
Is he living in Australia or he lives here in Colombia?
He lives in Colombia, yeah. So he'd be worth
Oh,
getting in
do
touch
you
with.
know him, Pablo? Because Pablo is also from Colombia. Do you know Juan Guerriza?
I don't.
Okay, so I
No,
should
but
make
we should meet
make
him.
mention. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's a wonderful chapter where he talks, for example, about the importance of sympathy, sort of the emotional connection, which is kind of interesting. So his data show that it's not just talking about common values; it's really learning about each other's lives, for example, that help. But these are very complicated things. It depends on the conflict, what exactly is the nature of the conflict and so on. And I see a challenging question from Paul Melman, which I'll get to soon along those lines. You asked what are the topics? So that would be in Northern Ireland, the topics right now are about reunification. That's one of the big challenges. But some people are not really prepared to talk about that. And some people find it very challenging just to talk about that because, in a way, that presupposes that one side wins if we talk about unification. So, in the meantime, what so the authors uh, Jennifer Todd and Joan McAvoy, and also Denisa Kostovikova. What they're writing about is, what do you do short of actually talking about the final constitutional status or outcome? You can talk about many things. You can talk about, the values of constitutional change. So, what would be the appropriate way of pursuing constitutional change, or just what should be the appropriate values or policies for getting along on a day-to-day basis. So it could be something that's not constitutional. It could be about hospital access and things like that. So you can really talk about many, many things, and sometimes demonstrating sort of civil dialogue between two sides is useful in itself. But I think that your question actually is a really, which is something that another of our authors, Carlos Jordan, writes about, which is the re-entry problem. It's all well and good to say people are able to deliberate with each other in mini publics, but then what? So the question is that going to lead to peacemaking on a broader scale? We have so much evidence that mini publics can work in Israel and Palestine, for example. But so what? It hasn't necessarily led to an end of the conflict. But I think that there are many answers to that. One is that uh, sometimes we need a trusted body to sort of lead the way. And it could be that that body will actually be heeded by elites in charge, but sometimes that's not going to happen when the elites are really entrenched in their particular points of view. But sometimes you can actually have a binding, not a mini public, but a commission. And so is the Israel-Lebanon case, and also Israel and its four neighbors in 1949, the commissions had notionally binding and in reality very, very much binding authority. So, they were able to make decisions about 400 times between 1949 and 1952 that averted war. So that's another answer to the so what question. Actually, sometimes you can make these things binding, and that's really significant. And sometimes they can be trusted by elites, but sometimes not. And then the other sort of important answer is that when we have a referendum, for example, having a mini public, and one of our authors is John Gastill. I think, yeah, he's listed there as well. So he's
Mhm.
at this whole method of making referendums more deliberative, and that's very important because if you have many publics involved in referendums, then you actually have a way of cutting through the din of competing arguments and so on in the referendum campaign, and that can be really useful. So there is you didn't quite ask, the so what question, but I think that's what you're implying. So I hope I've answered that. Um, who should be the third parties? I actually think questions like who convenes, who are the third parties, those are the easiest questions in a way because as this network will know, I think there are lots and lots of people who have developed a lot of expertise in this area now. So any country like here in Australia, we have New Democracy, we have Democracy Co, we have Mosaic Lab. So there are just there's an expanding number of companies that are available. And going back to the Israel and its neighbors question, the third party was really important, but when they got the third party right, it helped a lot. So, for example, they had military officers who were very neutral and who were excellent facilitators. Some of them weren't, though, and so that actually caused it to fall apart. Anyway, thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for those questions. Um, I
Thanks.
think we had a number. Do you mind if I answer or address Paul Melman's question?
Yeah, that's perfect. Exactly what I was gonna say. So yeah, go to Paul and then we'll go to Nick afterwards.
Okay, so let me just read the question. Can you back up your claim that value-based constitutional questions are the true basis for conflicts, rather than mere pretenses by small coalition regimes with hidden self-interested motives? The example of the Thai-Cambodian conflict was not convincing. So I hope I wasn't misleading on that. It's not the true basis. It's a leading basis. So not all conflicts are going to be, uh, based on this, but conflicts based on sovereignty, for example, of which there are many, sovereignty over territory, raise this problem of, well, what is the basis of sovereignty? And whether the true motive is just that you want to take your neighbor over for its resources, for example, or just to be nasty, or whether you actually believe in a way, it doesn't matter. The point is that the rhetoric is taking place on this level of all of those values that I listed. And many people, not everybody, but many people in a society will be convinced by that. And will think that, for example, if you're in Russia, you might think, well, of course, Ukraine was historically part of Russia and therefore ought to be brought back into the Russian fold. So this is the sort of thing that many people will give credit to. Now, if you had a deliberative process that was trusted and rigorous and so on that disputed that, then maybe that would actually um, help. Now, that's actually in a way a bad example because it's very unlikely to happen in Russia at the moment. But in other cases, like Thailand and Cambodia, it's much more likely that you would have, a free running mini public, for example. Now, I'm not sure why you say that the Thai-Cambodian conflict is not a convincing example. Having looked it up and researched it, it does seem like these topological and historical and cultural factors are the ones that are used in the rhetoric.
Yeah, I didn't mean that I think that the example is wrong necessarily, just that I don't think I given the complexity of geopolitical conflicts, I just felt like you didn't really provide that much evidence, which I mean I understand it's a limited presentation window. Like I'm sure going into the history of Thai and Cambodian institutions and how they relate to each other, would take too long. So I
Yeah,
understand. But I think that no, I just yeah, it's just a matter of the fact that um I it seems that there's a good reason to believe that there are probably hidden motives involved.
yeah,
Um
yeah,
and just that I I guess maybe it was unreasonable for me to expect like a long
No, it's helpful.
history.
These are great questions. I think in a way, your questions are the classic questions, right? So, how do you know that it's all about this? And your second question is very similar. How do you deal with the fact that hierarchy norms in small coalition regimes are often obfuscated, and therefore participants are often incentivized to negotiate in bad faith. So, there are a million reasons why deliberation doesn't happen. So as I said at the very end, what we're looking here is not perfection. And the deliberation is never going to be perfected, particularly in a conflict area. What we're looking for is kind of an incremental change. So a little bit more deliberation, hopefully a little bit less conflict as a result. So, while I think that in some cases, what we're proposing here is unlikely to actually happen, again, the Russian case, in other cases, it's arguable that it would help. So in the Thai Cambodian case, which I don't know as much about, to be honest, as like the Israeli case. In that case, I think that it's not clear that this would have helped, but it might have helped because there's a large sort of civil society kind of um, critical mass on all sides that actually might be swayed by deliberation, I think. So it's not going to work in all cases. And it's never going to work perfectly, but it might help incrementally,
Yeah.
despite the fact that there will always be bad faith actors.
And I think you also answered the question in other ways in some of your other responses, which I like that yeah, there are exactly like you said, like examples where it could be useful and just the amount of legitimacy that it might provide or the amount of legitimacy it might in fact like take away from someone who is trying to push a conflict against the interests of the people.
Yeah. Um, well, so sorry. I guess we're just agreeing with each
Yeah,
other.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm saying that that was that answer that you mentioned earlier, I think also is sort of an answer to my question. So thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ron. Next up, we have Nayuki. He had a couple of questions in the chat. Nayuki, would you like to come off mute and speak to your questions?
Yeah, thank you. So my questions are quite simple. So one is so when do you think exactly you can, so duty can be triggered, particularly in the case of the accelerate gradual escalation or kind of brazen activities. So I think probably if you can show the indicators or kind of a threshold that the monitoring authority might can rely on, that would be very helpful to make your proposal clearer. And
Yeah.
the second one is also kind of a practical question. So is it possible for you to kind of show the criteria for distinguishing the true deliberation from the sort of fraud deliberation? I think it also kind of helpful to address kind of concretely so how to um, guard against the instrumental or cosmetic sort of the compliance from the true deliberation in order to strengthen the practical credibility of your proposal. Thank you.
Yeah. No, these are unusually difficult questions. So, what exactly is this monetary body going to be looking for? And I don't think we've hashed that out yet. So, it's very difficult. Cecilia Jacob, who's one of the co-authors of this chapter as well, um, pushed us on this, but we just didn't have room for it and time as well. So. I don't know. I think that in subsequent work we would have to establish criteria for, when does this deliberative duty actually trigger? And then once it's triggered, you're right. How do we know that it's actually been entered into in good faith? So um, much of deliberative democracy, I think, is about sort of setting up institutions and hoping for the best. If we had a sort of monitoring body or like let's say a court determining whether you're deliberating or not, then that would just sort of lead to the further question of how are you going to decide that or design that court and that second guessing body. But I think what we need to do is to some extent trust that when you put people in deliberative democratic situations, they tend to deliberate in good faith. And why do we think that? Well, there's a heap of evidence in non-conflict areas and increasing evidence in conflict areas that that is the case, that for the most part, even in some of the most difficult conflicts, you will actually get people deliberating. So I think that one of the most interesting examples is the Israeli Arab, 1949 plus set of cases where it's really interesting because you have four mixed bodies where Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Syria, Israel and Jordan, and Israel and Egypt are hashing out their differences successfully several hundred times. And then at the same time, there's a much broader conciliation body that's looking for a sort of positive peace and is completely failing. So what's interesting is just the different design methods. One of them was very deliberative, one of them was not. The less deliberative body just failed completely, whereas the deliberative bodies worked very much. And so I think that in answer to the question of, well, how do you know that people are going to deliberate in good faith? How do you know that they won't fraudulently deliberate? You just, rather than have really strong criteria about that in advance, you have to hope that the institutions will do what they have done in the past, which is to actually encourage deliberation. But it won't always work. It certainly won't always work. And I think that in extreme cases, in clear cases, then you need to be able to declare that a particular party is not actually participating in good faith. But I'm not, again, we haven't figured out exactly what the criteria would be for that.
Thank you.
I fear that was my least satisfactory answer. That, we'll figure that out a little bit later. But in the meantime, we know that this works, but it won't always work.
Excellent. Thank you, Naoki. Great questions, and yeah, thank you everyone for your real hard-hitting questions tonight. I think it's been really engaging. It's really been glad to hear. So that's the end of the questions that we have so far. Does anyone have any additional questions? In this case, even if anyone, I'm going back to the questions that Ron had proposed. The second one about any international offices or projects that might be interested in collaborating. But David, I see your hand up.
Oh, I was just going to address that. I can't answer that question, but it seems to me that a way to think about it would be what international entities, what organizations, international organizations, what funders are already working on peace building, have some real influence, see a real problem that this could solve so that what you're talking about is the solution to their problem.
Yeah, the UN Department of Politics and Peacemaking Affairs is one of the most uh, promising, I think. Alice Hsu is working with them already, so on some of that online peacemaking, and they have a whole dedicated sort of sub office working on innovation. So I think that that's where we might focus, and both on future work, sort of future empirical work, but also, it's a little bit of I guess I'm wearing two hats, the academic, the sort of serious scholar, but also the advocate. I think that to some extent we want to see this actually happen because the work is normative as well. We want to advocate for this new duty. And so I think that UN bodies, even though they're not perfect, are probably the place to start.
Host something in the Democracy R&D member forum in the category called requests. If you have trouble getting there, send me an email. I'll help you do it. You'll get a bunch of people in different places at least thinking about it.
Sounds great. There's been a question about when the book will be out. We're not sure. We're sending the entire book to Oxford University Press on January the 15th. So hopefully late in 2020. 26 and not much later than that. That's when the book will be out.
Okay, perfect. So it seems like we've reached the end of our questions so far. So, Ron, I'm just going to pass it back to you quickly. There's any last words you want to be able to say?
No, other than thank you. Thank you very much. This has been really, really useful. I think that tough questions are often the best questions. And some of these questions were actually very, very tough and very helpful. So thank you.
Perfect, everyone. Thank you. Everyone, please join me in giving a really big virtual and in real life round of applause to Ron for the great presentation. We're really looking forward to reading your chapter and all the other chapters in the book. So very eager to be able to hear that release date and get a copy whenever it's available. And please feel free to promote it through the DRD network as well when it
Actually, can I
is.
say if anyone would like to follow up with any particular chapter that you want me to send you, please just drop me an email.
Perfect. Excellent. Um, so Ron, I'm just gonna ask you to can stop sharing your screen just because I can't unshare it. Thank you. And we're just gonna use this last little bit of time together, just to be able to do a quick round of updates. So as always, just to see if there's any new initiative, projects, paper, topic, anything that you want to be able to share that you think could be pertinent for the group or just important for the group to be able to hear. So I'll just go around the room, and if you have no updates, no worries. Feel free to pass, or just maybe speak to your work in general. So I'm going to start off with Christine, followed by Isabella, then Paul.
Oh, hi everyone. So I'm with New Democracy. Where are we at? Just a general sort of, I guess, statement of, this time of the year. Wrapping up with some meetings at sort of high level federally with, with one of our major political parties. Ian's been in the room and had some positive response. So we're working on some pictures really, and also in New South Wales, our state, where one of the largest states in Australia, where there is a little bit of a momentum from parliamentarians to be looking at deliberative work. So, for this stage of 2025, it's sort of, we're feeling like we've we've made some, this we're on a positive trajectory, we feel, this year.
Perfect, excellent. That's really glad to hear. Congratulations, and yes, almost the end of the year. So you get through that mountain of work right there. Next up, Isabella, followed by Paul.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning here in Canberra. So as you see, my name is Isabella. I recently moved from Sydney to Canberra, maybe 11 months ago. So I'm new to Canberra. For my fellows from Latin America, if you can maybe try to detect my accent. I'm originally from Brazil. I had a career with the United Nations, and I can call myself a former UN peacekeeper. I've been deployed to many conflict zones, including East Timor, where I was a political advisor. So I'm very fascinated by this idea of literally building state in a democratic and peaceful one. In this case, very successful one, which is East Timor. But I've been deployed to many places like Haiti, Angola, Senegal, and other places. In terms of academia, I'm a doctor and I'm also lecturer in university here in University of Canberra. I'm an author of a book that's called Peace or Democracy, which in lines with Professor Ron, where how do you build this when the conflict zones, or how do you get out of civil war or armed conflict when peace and democracy, they are in tension, not aligned according to the peace democratic theory. So I'm very fascinated by the work of Ron, and I'm here to contribute with whatever you want. Thank you.
Excellent, perfect. Thank you, Isabella, and glad to have you here. Next up, we have Paul, followed by Nayuki.
No updates at the moment, but hopefully soon. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Nayuki. Thanks, Paul. And then Nayuki, followed by Joe.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I don't have any specific update right now, but we are going to have an annual meeting of Japan Mini Public Research Forum next weekend. No, the weekend after the next. And we are going to feature long-standing use of the mini publics in some of the municipalities, and also featuring a partly on the use of AI for deliberation. Thank you.
Perfect. Very interesting. Thank you. And if you have any links or contacts to those that you want to be able to share, please feel free to put them in the chat or post them in the members forum. And then next up we have Joe, followed by Felipe. Joe, are you able to come off mute? No problem if not. Okay, no worries. Then we'll go to Felipe.
Hold on. Joe is working on a citizen assembly about rewriting the city charter of Los Angeles. For those of you who don't know, he recently presented about that.
Perfect. Thanks, David.
Yeah. Well, I guess I could mention that we are now working on the Democracy R&D report of 2025. So we published the first edition of the report in March of this year, which was about 2024, and now we are writing the 2025 report. And I'm glad, for example, Ron, that your book will be included in the 2026 report, because we have a section for scholarship and new publications, new books, and of course this one will be included in that report. I think that the next year, David, I don't know if you agree, but I think that we are going to have great publications next year, because Landemore's book is coming, Terry Bouricius' book, Peter McLaw's book, so and this one by Ron Levy. So that's good news. And the other thing that we are now working with Pablo, also with Democracy R&D, is on a policy paper on models of regulation for citizens' assemblies. So we want to try to study, what are the main possibilities for regulation of citizens' assemblies and the main models, and try to give a simple guide for people who would like to regulate citizens' assemblies, what kind of things they would have to include in that regulation. So that's something we just begun, and hopefully will come out also next year.
Very exciting. Thank you, Felipe. And Pablo, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Well, no, I have no updates more than introducing myself. I recently joined the network. I am working along David, Felipe, Chim, especially on the Constitutions and Charters group. And as Felipe just said, we are working on this very exciting policy paper. We're trying to add a bit more of legal and constitutional content to the network, hopefully producing some elements that might be useful for the members of the network. And I am also working with Felipe on the annual report, which will be out very soon. So I am very pleased to meet you all, especially in this Asia Pacific time zone that we don't see very often. So it is great to meet you all, and we'll be releasing some more content for the members, especially around this constitutions and charters interest group. So I am very pleased to meet you all and to join the network.
Perfect. Thank you, Pablo. Welcome aboard. And then David, anything that you want to be able to share?
Oh, two things that I'm working on. One is with Matthew Martin, who was here earlier. Oh, I am working with people like Matthew, in the Comparative Constitutions Project. They maintain a database called Constitute that has the texts of all the national constitutions in the world, all the versions going back to, I think, 1789. They did linguistic analysis on the texts and came out with a list of about 330 concepts that have been addressed in constitutions, and they put them in a hierarchy of categories and subcategories, so you can search this database for topics and subtopics, countries, at different times. The identification of the topics is great. The hierarchy of topics and subtopics is very user unfriendly. It's mostly in alphabetical order, and you'll have 16 or 23 sub-branches to a branch. So Matthew and I have drafted a much more user-friendly version, and we got it reviewed by Zachary Elkins and Tom Ginsberg and Ashley Moran in the project all last week. So we're continuing to work on that. That's one thing. Hopefully this will end up going on their website and make it much easier for people to navigate and use. Second thing, kind of based on that, I'm starting to develop a mind map that would be essentially an online visual guide to constitution design that would complement the best existing primers. Why do this? Two purposes. One, make constitution design much more understandable, much less overwhelming than it is in the usual guidebooks and so forth. And two, to make room for new ideas, starting with ideas from deliberative democracy, but going beyond that. So I'm just in the very beginning, sort of little tiny prototype stage of that, but I'm going to be reviewing that with Felipe and Pablo and with Matthew tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Perfect. Thanks, David. A lot of fun, exciting stuff happening. And so with that, thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, thank you, Ron, for leading us through the exciting work, and we're really excited to be able to see how it develops when it's published.
Thank you.
Next up, oh, sorry, go on, Ron.
I was just going to say thank you. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you very much. And so next up, I just want to give you a quick heads up over some of the next meetings that will be happening. And so on December 4th, we'll be having a field building learning call on the Feed A Citizens Assemblies schools. Next up on December 10th, we'll be doing round two. We'll be right back with Ron and for the different time zone for the European members. So in case anyone's watching the recording, you get another chance to be able to add your input at round two of this meeting. And then on December 11th, we will be having another field building learning call. This one will be on the One World or None comic book and documentary film. So I'll just paste those within the chat. And in the meantime, we'll hope to see you all soon and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to see you all.